This was a very sad week on so many levels for our country, and it is our custom to pray for our country on Shabbat. But regardless of where you stand on either issue one way or another, let's ask for a special prayer for our country on this Shabbat. Let's join together on the bottom of 376. O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation always merit your protection. Teach us to give thanks for what we have by sharing it with those who are in need. Keep our eyes open to the wonders of creation and alert to the care of the earth. May we never be lazy in the work of peace. May we honor those who have died in defense of our ideals. Grant our leaders wisdom and forbearance. May they govern with justice and compassion. Help us all to appreciate one another and to respect the many ways that we may serve you. May our homes be safe from affliction and strife, and our country be sound in body and spirit. Amen. So the difficult week for our country includes all matter of what this week's Parsha, Noach, calls Hamas. Now, Hamas is indeed the same word in the Torah portion that is used by the terrorist organization Hamas. But the word itself means chaos. It doesn't mean terrorist organization that wants Israel destroyed, although that is indeed what Hamas is. But the word in its most literal translation is chaos. Chaos. And when you think of everything going on from coast to coast, whether it's in the political realm or these awful fires that are devastating my home state of California, to be on the phone with friends this week hearing that they are on mandatory evacuations feels surreal and reminds me of 30 years ago when I, in October of 1989, experienced the Loma Prieta 7.1 earthquake. It feels like Hamas, chaos. In Judaism, there is a cosmic connection between that Hamas that we experience or that we see around us, and I don't believe this necessarily, but divine retribution. That is to say, chaos leads to chaos, and when God sees chaos, God doesn't get very happy about things. So if you think about it in the context of last week's Parsha, again, I don't believe God punishes us through fires and all these things. But I believe that there is something to be learned when it feels like the world around you is on fire. And that's in this week's Parsha. So what does God do? God says, Control, Alt, Delete. I created the world. I can uncreate the world. And, of course, orders the flood. Finds Noach, the best guy that he could find at that time, a guy who was called a righteous one of his generation, which means he's the best one that he could find. There were no really good people around, and Noah was the best one that he could find. And many of you remember the many debates and fights Rabbi Keller and I had about Noah. Rabbi Keller thought Noah was the greatest guy ever, and I thought Noah was and is a putz. And yes, I said the word putz from the Bima. It's a Yiddish word. I said it twice. So the point about Noach is that whether you see him as righteous just in his generation or righteous in general, we get desperate for leaders when the world around us seems like it's Hamas, when it seems like it's desperate. So God presses Control, Alt, Delete on that massive global universal computer system and destroys the world by flood. And then at the end of the flood, God shows what? What is the sign that God shows that, okay, maybe I went a little harsh this time and I shouldn't do that again? The Keshet, the rainbow. That's correct. And so the rainbow symbolizes, it's not just a beautiful thing, but it symbolizes God's Otile Olam, this permanent symbol that God will not destroy the earth by flood again. And then the Torah portion takes the most bizarre direction, and in 9 short verses, this, what we call prehistoric mythological section of Torah ends, leading up to the birth of Abraham, which will be the first Jew next week. And there are 9 short verses, and here are the 9 short verses. Flood's over. Earth is now getting repopulated. People are now coming together. And the following happens. Chapter 11, for those of you who are following along at home. All the earth had the same language. Oh, that's a good sign. They all used the same words. As they wandered from the east, they came upon a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. Then people said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and build and fire them hard." So they had bricks to build with, and tar served as the mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build a city with a big tower that reaches the sky so that we can make a name for ourselves and not be scattered all over the earth." Then God came down and looked at the city and the tower and the people had built, and the Eternal One said, "Hey, look." I said, "Hey, look. These are all one people with one language," which we would think is a good thing, right? "And this is just the beginning of their doings. Now, no scheme of theirs will be beyond their reach." God is very mystified by this and does the following. "Let us go down there," God says, us, probably the angels in the, heavenly court. "Let us go down there and confuse their speech." Almost as if to say, ironically, God wants to create a little Hamas, a little chaos. So let us go down there, and tomorrow morning you can ask at Torah study if it's the same word that is used. I'm not going to tell you now. You have to come to Torah study to find that out. Let us go down, confuse their speech, so that no one understands what the other is saying. So it came about that God scattered them all over the earth, and they stopped building the city, and that is why it was called Babel. By the way, that is the etymological Hebrew word that not only leads to the idea of, the name of Babylonia and Babel, but when you say someone is babbling, that is right here. That's where that comes from. Those of you at home, Google it. I'm right. I'm right. I just know I am. Because the Eternal confused their speech to someone who talks like they're confused, right? They're babbling, like I'm doing right now. And God scattered them all over the face of the earth. So it's very ironic. God sees the people. They're speaking one language. Our bat mitzvah is going to speak about this tomorrow morning. In fact, both of our benot mitzvah are going to speak about this tomorrow morning from their perspectives. I wanted to make sure not to step on your toes because your drashes are much better than anything I have to say about this. However, what an interesting dynamic in the parsha. God destroys the world because everybody isn't getting along and there is Hamas. And God destroys the Tower of Babel because everybody is getting along, speaking the same language, and God creates the Hamas to confuse them so that the tower cannot be built. So this is, like I said, the last mythological part of the Torah, what we call prehistory. Some of you are thinking, well, isn't it all a little bit mythological? No, of course not. But before we come to Abraham, the Torah needs to settle this question, probably on a very basic level, of how did people get scattered? They were at this time living in the Fertile Crescent. We have to set up the story of Abraham, who begins his career at the place called Ur of the Chaldeans, Ur meaning the city, at the bottom of the Tigris and Euphrates River. So it's a good setup for that context. And in these 9 verses, we then get the progeny of Noah, which brings us to Abraham, but that's all very academic, and we want to know, what does this story mean? Well, according to the Rambam, Moses Maimonides, who, by the way, lived in Spain, was born in Spain, and if you come on the trip in March to Spain, you will be visiting Maimonides, Rambam's home. Very cool. Look for the email this weekend. Abraham, this is all again the setup, according to Rambam, Maimonides, Abraham's mission and the nation that sprung from his, him and Sarah, from their loins, as you will, was to repudiate the fragmented notion of transcendence along with the morality and mores that derive from there. which means to overlook the historic context. Maimonides claimed in his book, Moreh Nevuchim, and the Guide for the Perplexed, was to render many of the Torah injunctions inexplicable. And it's no accident that in Maimonides' code, in the number of mitzvot, the 13 commandments, to be found in the book, idolatry, 51, or against idolatry, far exceeds the number in any other book. What Rambam is saying is that this all predates Abraham, because where Abraham's from, they built these things called ziggurats. And these ziggurats were these towers. And these towers were idols, basically, big towers. Look how great we are. We can do construction. We can build these great big towers going up to heaven. But none of the speculation has any basis in the Torah. In other words, what does give us a lens to which, through the Tower of Babel, several features of that short story are noteworthy. It is a tale, a story of, according to Rabbi Itzmar Shorsh, who was the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. He teaches the story of the Tower of Babel was a tale of estrangement. Whatever intimacy Noah may have enjoyed with God is gone. Noah's gone from the story after the flood. The emphasis is on materialism, material goods. The inhabitants of this place, Shinar, therefore, take pride in their ability to compensate for their lack of natural resources. These people are nothing like Abraham. And so they brag about, the Torah shows them bragging about these well-made bricks. And as you're going to talk about tomorrow morning in your drash, how the bricks and the material goods became more important than their relationships. I'll leave it there because I know you've got a great example that you're going to teach tomorrow morning. So what was more important to them was materialism, right? We have this story of Hamas and the flood. The world had become terrible. One of the Midrashim teaches us that people before the story of the flood had become too materialistic, and even after the story had become materialistic. See, we need Abraham. That's what the Torah is doing here. So God is less accessible in that world. In other words, and I think we all know this ourselves, that while human beings try to build their own gods, idols, things of material, we become materialistic as a way of showing how great we are, how superior we are, how wonderful we are, and then we give lots and lots of tzedakah so that we can put our names on big buildings, right? All of that stuff is not God's thing, as it turns out, according to Maimonides. Surrounded by monuments of our own ingenuity, we grow deaf, Rabbi Shorsh says, to the echoes of eternity. In the biblical tale, God's voice is conspicuously absent in the face of human arrogance. Look at us building these buildings, how great we are. God withdraws to the most remote corner of the cosmos, hence the desire to flood the earth and then to confound human language. That is to say, to separate everyone, because these people, as if to say, God said, well, I can't destroy them anymore. At least I can get them not to speak the same language, because that doesn't work out either. The building of the Tower of Babel, then, was an act of rebellion that was born of prosperity, according to the rabbis. In the phrase that they settled in this place, this Shinar place, the rabbis felt a tone of finality. The migrants from the east had ended their wanderings because they had come upon a land that was bursting with blessing, yet what God had intended after the story of the flood, which was for them to really create tikkun ulam, to relate to something higher than themselves, to see something bigger than themselves out there, sort of backfired just again. They were more interested in self-satisfaction, and they fed their arrogance, according to the rabbis, by building these big buildings. Like, what is a big building? It's a big building. And it can be, as we see going back to California and going back to what we see in our country, anything that is built by human arrogance, and anything that is built with the idea that it is impervious and great and can't be ruined, can be. Nature doesn't care if your house is on a beach or on an earthquake fault or in a place where the fire is. The fire consumes it either way. So the rabbis teach us a big lesson about humility. That confounding speech and confusing the speech was really about humbling these people. The Tower of Babel fits this theme, pre-Abrahamic theme, that people, whether it's Adam and Eve in the garden eating from the tree, or Cain killing Abel because his sacrifice wasn't big enough or great enough, to the story of Noah and the flood, to what happens after the flood, to the Tower of Babel, all of these stories are crying out, the rabbis teach us, for someone to do the right thing and set the right standard, and that's where Abraham will come next week. Finally, Rabbi Shor says to move from one to many languages implies the move from one to many gods. Mired in things material, we lose sight of the spiritual. Rebellion against God subverts the destiny and vision for us at the beginning as partners in the sustaining of creation. God needs a partner. And so this is all the preamble to Abraham. Abraham will be the partner, Sarai as well, the partner in building up a people who not only live in the image of God, but see themselves as in the image of God, and then bring along people, as we learn next week in Lech Lecha, to complete, to begin the mission of becoming a holy people. To be a Jew, we learn at the end of this story, is to not identify ourselves as the children of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Noah. In fact, I would argue the first Parshiyot are stories to tell us what not to be and how not to be. And next week's Parsha, Lech Lecha, go to yourself or leave your home, leave your comfort zone, is all about taking the risky journey, the journey that's going to be filled with trauma, and it's going to be filled with good times and bad times, but it's about the journey where we see not ourselves as the solution, but we see outside of ourselves as the solution to Tikkun Olam, to building the world. So on this Shabbat, we finish these stories where we should not see ourselves as active participants in the story, but rather next week in Lech Lecha to see ourselves as partners with Abraham, as the children of Abraham, partners with God in the ongoing creation of the world, the creation that was so messed up last week and this week, and now will be fixed and healed and put together by one man, by Abraham. So I hope you're getting excited for Lech Lecha. This was really all just a way of saying these stories are preambles to next week. Materialism and idol worship and seeing ourselves as the greatest possible outcome to God's creation, all of that is wrong and is not Jewish. What is Jewish, or what we will learn is Jewish, is seeing ourselves as the son of Abraham and the daughter of Sarai, of people willing to take risks to do the right things for the right reasons. And so on that note, throughout the Shabbat, I hope you will think about these stories that we've read last week and this week, and think about how it is that we as individuals and